I'm now in conversation with James Rattling Leaf Sr. He's based in South Dakota. He's a tribal member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. Is that correct,
Correct.
James?
Yes.
And he's going to be one of our panelists at the Planet Earth After COVID-19 webinar next week. And this is an opportunity for him to talk about his career and his life and his vision for the environment and acting as a bridge between tribal cultures and Western cultures. So, James, tell me how it all started for you.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and to share my thoughts, my experiences, and also who I am. As you mentioned, I'm a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe here in South Dakota, USA, and over the past 20 years, I've dedicated my life to work in this space, what I call ethical space, between the Western approach to knowledge and also the traditional knowledge of Indigenous people, in particular my own people, the Rosebud Sioux tribe. And so I had a great opportunity to work with many organizations around the country, primarily Earth System Science organizations. And so it's been a great effort, great opportunity for me to build programs, to develop programs, and also to share and to what I would call create greater understanding about who we are still in 2020 as American Indian people or Indigenous people. We have a history, we have a knowledge, and we also have something we call a cultural heritage that's very important to us. And so we're at a time in our world, especially with COVID-19, that we're finding great challenges, but also we're seeing the vulnerabilities of our communities because of this. Vulnerabilities in terms of access to technology, access to resources, also challenging the health disparities that we've experienced for many years. And so we're very concerned of how we're going to respond to these kind of things. But also in that response, what are we going to do? And how are we going to do it? And what kind of information and knowledge do we need to move forward in terms of protecting our community? So this is a really important time for me in my work as I begin to outreach and share not only what I do, but also ideas about how we address these great challenges. So these are grand challenges in our times, especially for Indigenous people. And so the work that I continue to do is to work with both Indigenous people in America, as well as my new work globally, working with Indigenous nations and people and students. I think the other part that I'm really excited about this coming year is to work with students. That's important because there's a term that the UN uses called intergenerational knowledge transfer. And so it's important that as oral history cultures, that we find more effective ways to transfer that knowledge from our elders to our youth and to figure out the best ways to do that. And so there's a lot of things to do, a lot of work to do, and I'm excited to be a part of this conversation to see what we can do going forward.
I can see and I can understand very well some of the problems that COVID-19 has caused, particularly with disadvantaged communities, maybe communities that don't have Western lifestyles. But one of the things that occurs to me, and I'd appreciate your views on this, is that with COVID-19, if you're talking about what's happening in the UK here, we're in a situation of lockdown and social isolation. Now, for someone like myself who lives in the countryside, my only hardship is that I can't travel in the way that I used to do. But I can still go for my 5-mile walk every morning in the countryside, and I have beautiful surroundings, and I'm really seeing the benefits of the local community coming together to support each other. So the question I have is really, is COVID-19, although it's a terrible tragedy, is it maybe an opportunity for us to create a new way of living, which in many ways probably is closer to tribal cultures?
Right. Well, I think that's a great question. I know for one thing, I can tell you that COVID again has sort of exposed our interconnectivity or interdependency. as cultures and as human beings. I'll give you an example. In America, on the Navajo Nation reservation in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, they're one of the leading tribes that are being affected by COVID, and they're as big as the state of Connecticut. Yet they're just being inundated. They're being challenged. They're being overwhelmed by COVID, and they're a great. There's a big geography there, right? They're dispersed, but why is it happening there versus my tribe where we're more urbanized here in South Dakota? Well, it's because it's how we work and how we function, how we live as cultures. Our families are very important. We have something called extended families, or tioshpes in my country, where aunts and uncles, grandmas, grandpas, we tend to have that close proximity. And so obviously, when you're in that close proximity, you're more likely to be infected with COVID. Now, what do we do? I mean, do we have to, social distance those cultures, to change those cultures, those life ways? I mean, that's in front of us today. And I think we got to go back to the wisdom of our elders and to have them help us and guide us in terms of how we adapt to this new way of living. And also, I think, David, that we're finding more and more of emerging partnerships coming together with the Navajo people to address these things. So healthcare is a big one. We found foundations that want to invest. They want to look at issues like water, like clean drinking water. I mean, that reservation, for instance, is there's still a lack of an infrastructure for clean drinking water yet in 2020 in America. So again, COVID is exposing these long-standing issues, and maybe we can all come together, for example, to support the Navajo Nation in terms of building a water infrastructure that makes sense for them, that's good for the environment, and really supports their cultural heritage.
That's an interesting observation that you make, particularly the fact that the Navajo aren't as urbanized as your tribe, and they're more dispersed. You would think that COVID-19 would be less of a problem in that kind of environment. But when I think about the European countries and some of the differences in culture there, and I look at Italy, they have a culture in Italy that they have extended families all living together in the same, in a completely different way to we have in the UK. We don't see that in the UK. We see a lot of mobility between generations, so that children live away from their parents and their grandparents. So they don't live in the same community in the same way that they do in other countries. And so you can understand why in that environment, when families are in close proximity, that they are going to be more vulnerable to COVID-19, particularly as we understand that COVID-19 is much more dangerous for the older generation than it is for the younger generation. There's also some indications from what we hear in the UK that there are differences in the way that COVID-19 impacts different cultures. So the Black American minority ethnic groups tend to be more affected by COVID-19 than others. And it seems to be a genetic factor rather than anything else. So there are many things that are happening that we're still learning about. And as you say, I think it's vitally important that we bring together the wisdom of the elders and the passion and interest in the younger generations to actually try and do something about it and address these imbalances that we've had in the past.
Right. Well, yeah. I agree. I think I was just on a call here yesterday with the UN, and again, they're talking about these inequities and talking about how do we address them from a global perspective. And so I think, the more and more that that we as Indigenous people are involved and there's greater opportunities for participation and equity and real partnerships. And I think progress can be made, but also we also know that the challenge is great. There's a great divide between the have and have-nots. And so it's a tremendous challenge. It's going to require, I think, a new kind of leadership.
Hmm.
a new kind of leadership, new kind of skills. As you mentioned, taking the best of our cultural heritage is to address these opportunities, and even preparing the next generation. I think that's a big one, is how do we prepare our next generation leaders? Because as we get older, we're going to need we're going to be depending on their leadership and their decisions going forward. So we want to do what we can right now, prepare them for that great challenging time.
Hmm. That's very true. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, James, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more to say next Tuesday in the webinar. In the interim, I will be publishing your video as a way of promoting the webinar, so that people have an idea of the great talent that's there within the panelists, the friends of Tim Falsman.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to him for making the suggestions that he's made for a panel. I've known Tim since 2003.
Okay.
I count him as a very, very good friend, and anybody that Tim is impressed by, I'm almost certainly going to be impressed by. So, you are in that league, and I just want to say thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, and I look forward to speaking to you again on Tuesday. Just for your information, we are running an event tomorrow in the afternoon in the UK. It's 2 o'clock UK time. It's
okay.
what I call a new normal networking event. So it's an informal session, and it's the first one that I've run in this series, and it's designed really to bring people from different disciplines together. So people in the webinar yesterday were talking about the use of digital technologies to tackle COVID-19 through remote healthcare management. And on next Tuesday, we're talking about planet Earth. We're talking about health of two different things, human beings and our planet.
Right.
And I think there's a lot we can learn by mixing disciplines. So the idea is that I welcome any of our panelists from next week and any of our panelists from yesterday, and the people who participated in the webinars. I will be sending an email out inviting them to join this event. It's it's not compulsory, not essential, but if you feel that you would like to join the event and share what you shared with me today with other people and other disciplines, you'd be more than welcome to join us, and I will send you details of that. But if you're not around tomorrow, don't worry. We'll be having the webinar on Tuesday, and I'm really looking forward to a very insightful and enjoyable and productive webinar. I think you guys, with your experience, your approach, and your positive nature, these are the kind of characteristics that we need if we are going to make some important changes to our future. So thank you very much once again.